The summer sun shone brightly over the quiet fields of Kentucky, spreading a golden light across the small town that sat near the edge of Mammoth Cave. The town was peaceful, with children running barefoot along dirt paths, and the scent of corn and tobacco drifting through the warm air. For 3 boys, however, that day was not about chores or games in the yard. It was about adventure. Tommy, Eddie, and Samuel had been talking about it for weeks, the day they would finally explore the great underground world that lay beneath their feet. Mammoth Cave had always been more than just a cave to the people of the town. It was a place filled with stories. Some of the older folks spoke about its endless tunnels, saying they could swallow a person whole and never let them out again. Others told tales of treasures hidden deep within the stone, or strange sounds that came from below when the wind shifted just right. For the young boys, these stories were not warnings but invitations. To them, Mammoth Cave was not frightening. It was exciting, mysterious, and waiting for them to discover it. Tommy, the oldest of the 3, was a natural leader. At 13, he carried himself with confidence, and the younger boys often followed his lead. Eddie, a year older than Tommy, was taller and quieter, though he had a streak of curiosity that often got him into trouble. Samuel, at 12, was the youngest and most energetic, always asking questions and eager to prove he could keep up with his friends. Together, they made a lively trio, spending their days fishing in the river, racing down the dirt roads, and planning bigger adventures than the town could hold. That morning, they met under the old oak tree that stood at the edge of town. Each carried a small pack with a few biscuits, a flask of water, and a lantern borrowed from their families. Their parents believed they were going for a simple walk through the woods, nothing out of the ordinary for a summer day. The boys had no intention of worrying them with talk of the cave. If they had told the truth, they knew they would never have been allowed to go. So they kept their secret between themselves, speaking in whispers and exchanging eager glances as they set out. The path to the cave wound through thick trees and open fields. Birds sang overhead, and the sun painted long shadows on the ground. The boys walked quickly, full of energy, their voices carrying through the warm air. They spoke of what they expected to find: huge caverns, sparkling rocks, underground rivers, and maybe even hidden tunnels that no one had walked through before. Samuel's imagination ran the wildest. He spoke of lost explorers and hidden maps, of treasures that might still be waiting somewhere in the dark. Eddie smiled at his stories, though he often reminded him that they should be careful. Tommy, on the other hand, encouraged Samuel's ideas, knowing it kept the excitement alive. After nearly an hour, the forest grew thicker, and the air began to feel cooler. The entrance to the cave came into view like a dark mouth carved into the hillside. The opening was wide, framed by stone and half hidden by hanging branches. The boys stood silently for a moment, staring at it. The shadows within seemed to move with the breeze, and the cool air that drifted out was a sharp contrast to the summer heat around them. "This is it," Tommy said, gripping the strap of his pack. His voice carried both excitement and the smallest hint of nervousness. Samuel stepped closer, his eyes wide with wonder. "It looks bigger than I thought," he whispered. Eddie looked at the entrance for a long moment, then adjusted his lantern. "We should stay close together," he said. "No wandering off." Tommy nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the darkness. He struck a match and lit his lantern, the warm glow pushing against the shadows. Samuel and Eddie did the same, and soon 3 small lights flickered in their hands. The glow reached only a few steps ahead, but it was enough to give them courage. They stepped inside, one after another. The air grew cooler still, wrapping around them like a damp blanket. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone walls, mingling with the steady drip of water from unseen places above. The floor was uneven, scattered with rocks and patches of sand. The walls, rough and damp, seemed to close in and stretch out all at once, creating a space that was both narrow and endless. At first, the boys laughed and called out, listening to the echoes bounce back at them. Their voices sounded strange, in the cave, as if someone else were speaking just behind them. Samuel ran his hand along the stone, marveling at how cold it felt. Tommy led the way, his lantern held high while Eddie kept glancing back toward the faint light of the entrance, which grew smaller and smaller the farther they walked. They came to a wide chamber where the ceiling arched high above, vanishing into shadows. Stalactites hung down like frozen spears, glistening faintly in the lantern light. The boys gasped at the sight, their excitement renewed. They explored every corner of the chamber, pointing out shapes in the stone, laughing when their shadows stretched tall and strange across the walls. For a moment it felt like the cave was welcoming them, offering a glimpse of its beauty. But the cave was vast, and the chamber was only the beginning. Beyond it stretched a narrow passage that sloped downward into even deeper darkness. Tommy was eager to go on, certain that greater wonders lay ahead. Eddie hesitated, his quiet nature making him cautious. Samuel, however, pushed forward, his lantern swinging wildly as he hurried into the passage. The deeper they went, the more the outside world faded away. The sound of birds and wind disappeared, replaced only by their breathing and the occasional drip of water. The air was damp, carrying the scent of earth and stone. Their small lights revealed just enough to show them where to step, but the shadows seemed endless, always just out of reach. They passed through winding passages that twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small rooms, other times narrowing so much they had to squeeze through side by side. Each turn brought new surprises, strange rock formations, hidden cracks that seemed to lead nowhere, and pools of still water that reflected their lantern light like small mirrors. The boys spoke less now, their laughter replaced by whispers, as if raising their voices too loud might disturb something within the cave. Though they had only been inside for a short while, time felt different underground. Minutes stretched long and every step felt heavier, yet their curiosity drove them forward. Tommy's determination, Eddie's cautiousness, and Samuel's enthusiasm blended together, pulling them deeper and deeper into the unknown. None of them thought about turning back, not yet. To them, the adventure had only just begun, and the mysteries of the cave seemed endless. What they did not know was that the cave, with all its beauty and wonder, also held secrets far darker than they imagined. The cool air, the endless passages, the strange echoes, all of it was leading them farther from the sunlight they had left behind. And though the boys did not yet sense it, the adventure that started with laughter beneath the summer sky was slowly becoming something far more dangerous, something that would change their lives forever. The deeper the boys walked, the more the cave seemed to change. At first, the passages had been wide enough for them to walk side by side, their lanterns filling the space with a warm glow. But soon, the walls began to narrow, and the ceiling dipped lower, forcing them to hunch slightly as they moved forward. The air was heavy now, carrying the scent of damp stone and still water. Every step echoed, bouncing off the walls in a way that made the cave feel alive. Tommy led the way, his lantern swinging gently in his hand. He tried to appear confident, but inside, his heart was beating faster than usual. He had promised the others that he knew what he was doing, that exploring the cave would be fun and safe. Still, he could not shake the feeling that the cave was much bigger than he had imagined. It seemed endless, as if the passages stretched far beyond what his lantern could reveal. Behind him, Eddie walked in silence, his face serious. He was not one to laugh easily, and in this place, he felt even quieter than usual. His lantern light showed him the walls close to his side, glistening with moisture. Drops of water slid down the stone and gathered into tiny pools on the ground. The sound of dripping was constant, a slow rhythm that followed them no matter where they went. Eddie kept glancing back, looking for the faint light of the entrance, but it was long gone. Now, there was only darkness behind them, darker than night itself. Samuel, on the other hand, tried to keep his spirits high. His lantern swung with his quick steps, sending light dancing across the stone. "It's like another world," he whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "Look at these rocks. They shine like glass." He touched the rough surface of the wall, his small fingers tracing the strange shapes carved by time. To him, the cave was not frightening, at least not yet. It was magical, full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The passage curved, leading them into a wider space, The ceiling here was so high that their lanterns could not reach it, and their small flames flickered in the vastness. Shadows stretched and bent, moving as the boys walked. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, scattered with stones and patches of fine sand. Samuel crouched to draw shapes in the sand with his finger, while Tommy lifted his lantern higher, scanning the space. "Do you hear that?" Eddie asked suddenly, his voice low. The others paused. For a moment, all they could hear was their own breathing and the steady drip of water. Then, faintly, there was something else, a soft rush, like air moving through a hidden passage. "It's just the cave breathing," Tommy said quickly, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "The air has to go somewhere." Samuel tilted his head, listening. "It sounds like it's calling us forward," he said, half smiling. Eddie frowned. "It sounds like it's warning us." The boys stood quietly for a moment, their lanterns glowing in the emptiness. Then Tommy took a deep breath and walked ahead. "We'll be fine," he said. "We just have to stick together." As they continued, the passage began to twist again, leading them downward. The walls pressed closer, the air cooler and heavier with every step. Their voices, once loud and playful, had grown softer, as if the cave itself demanded silence. Even Samuel stopped his chatter, his wide eyes darting from one shadow to the next. Time inside the cave seemed to stretch and bend. Minutes felt like hours, and the boys could no longer guess how long they had been walking. Their lanterns burned steadily, but the light felt weaker against the vast darkness. Each time they turned a corner, they expected to see the way out, or at least some familiar landmark. But instead, they found only more tunnels, each one looking the same as the last. A feeling of unease began to creep into their minds. Tommy tried to push it away, telling himself that he could find the way back if he wanted to. He remembered the path they had taken, or at least, he thought he did. But now, every turn looked alike. Every wall carried the same damp patterns, and every chamber seemed to mirror the last. Samuel was the first to speak what they were all thinking. "Do you think we might be lost?" His voice was small, the words nearly swallowed by the cave. Tommy hesitated. "We just need to retrace our steps," he said firmly. "If we turn back now, we'll find the entrance again." Eddie's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure about that?" "We've been turning so many times, I don't know which way is forward and which is back." The thought settled heavily in the air. For the first time, the cave felt less like an adventure and more like a trap. Still, Tommy lifted his lantern and motioned them onward. "Let's keep moving. We'll find something that leads us back." They pressed on, their footsteps quieter now, more careful. The floor sloped downward and the air grew colder still. Their lanterns flickered as if the cave itself was breathing on the flames. In the silence, every sound seemed louder. The scrape of a boot on stone, the drip of water from above, even the faint crackle of the lantern wicks. Then, without warning, Samuel's foot struck a loose rock, and he stumbled. His lantern swung wildly, its light bouncing off the walls in dizzying flashes. Tommy grabbed his arm to steady him, but for a moment, their hearts pounded in unison. The sudden movement had made the shadows leap across the walls, tall and shifting. "Like living things, I'm fine," Samuel said quickly, though his voice trembled. "It just startled me." Eddie exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "We need to be more careful. If one of these lanterns breaks, we'll be in complete darkness." That thought hung heavy over them as they continued. The idea of being without light in this endless maze was terrifying. Each boy held his lantern closer now, guarding the small flame as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The passage opened again, this time into a chamber where the ceiling dripped with long, thin formations like stone icicles. The lantern light reflected faintly off the wet surfaces, making the rocks sparkle as though dusted with crystals. For a brief moment, the boys forgot their fear, staring in awe at the natural beauty around them. "It's like stars underground," Samuel whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. Tommy smiled faintly. "See? This is why we came. No one else from town has seen this." Eddie did not smile. His gaze lingered on the narrow openings leading away from the chamber. There were 3 of them, each a dark tunnel that disappeared quickly into shadow. "Which way now?" he asked quietly. Tommy lifted his lantern toward the middle passage. "That one looks the widest," he said. Eddie frowned. "Or it could be the one that takes us further away." Samuel, full of energy again, pointed eagerly. "Let's try it. Maybe it leads to an even bigger chamber." Tommy's confidence wavered, but he nodded and stepped into the chosen passage. The others followed, their lanterns glowing like tiny stars swallowed by the darkness. Behind them, the chamber grew smaller and smaller until it was gone, leaving only the narrow tunnel ahead. As they moved forward, the walls seemed to close in tighter, and the air felt thicker. Their footsteps echoed strangely as though someone else were walking just behind them. Every so often one of the boys would turn quickly, their lantern flashing back into the darkness. But there was nothing there, only the endless cave. The boys pressed on, their hearts heavy, their breaths shallow. The laughter and excitement that had filled the start of their journey were gone now, replaced by a silence that grew deeper with every step. They did not yet know it, but the cave was slowly drawing them further from safety, leading them into places where sunlight had never reached, and where only one of them would ever find the way back again. The tunnel they had chosen stretched endlessly, winding and twisting in ways that seemed impossible to map. Every turn led to another passage, another small chamber, and yet another choice of paths. The boys' lanterns cast flickering circles of light that danced across the rough walls, showing shapes and shadows that sometimes looked like creatures watching them. The deeper they went, the more the cave seemed to close around them, and an odd feeling settled into their stomachs, a mix of excitement and unease that refused to leave. Tommy, still leading, tried to keep his voice calm. "It's just the cave," he said, forcing a smile. "We're okay. We just need to keep moving." Samuel, however, was unusually quiet. He had been exploring eagerly just moments ago, but now his steps were slower, careful, as if the walls themselves were watching him. "It's so big down here," he whispered. "I don't even know how far it goes." Eddie stayed close to Tommy, glancing at every shadow and listening to every sound. The dripping water, the faint echo of their footsteps, and the occasional creak of stone all seemed amplified in the stillness. He tugged gently on Tommy's sleeve. "Maybe we should mark the wall so we don't get lost," he suggested. Tommy nodded, remembering that small piece of rope he had in his pack. They tied small knots in the rope at intervals, dragging it behind them to act as a guide. It reassured them slightly, but the cave still felt endless, and the darkness beyond their lanterns seemed almost alive. As they continued, the tunnel widened into a chamber that was unlike anything they had seen so far. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like delicate chandeliers, dripping slowly into tiny pools on the floor. The walls sparkled faintly, as if sprinkled with dust of silver, reflecting the lantern light in soft glimmers. Samuel ran his fingers along a formation that resembled a frozen waterfall, marveling at the smoothness of the stone. "It's beautiful," he breathed. "I wish we could stay here forever." But the beauty could not hide the growing tension. From somewhere deep within the cave came a sound that made the boys freeze. A soft, distant noise like the echo of water flowing, but different somehow, sharper and more deliberate. Tommy held his lantern high and listened. "It's probably just a stream," he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Eddie shook his head. "No, it's different. Listen." The noise came again, clearer this time. It was a faint scraping sound, almost like something moving across stone. The boys looked at each other, their faces tight with worry. For the first time, the cave did not feel friendly or magical. It felt unpredictable, as if it held secrets that might never be uncovered. Samuel's curiosity, however, could not be contained. "Maybe there's another passage," he said, edging closer to the sound. "Maybe it leads somewhere amazing." "Wait," Eddie warned. "We shouldn't just follow a sound we don't understand." Tommy paused, unsure. He wanted to keep the boys safe, but he also didn't want to turn back yet. The excitement of discovery was still strong, pushing him forward despite the rising fear. "We'll just look carefully," he said. "We'll stay together." The boys moved cautiously toward the noise. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to walk single file. The sound grew louder, echoing in the confined space, and their lanterns illuminated strange patterns on the walls. Shadows stretched unnaturally, creating illusions of movement that made their hearts race. Then it happened. A small section of the wall had collapsed slightly, forming a narrow crevice. Samuel, unable to resist, stepped closer, peering into the opening. "It's a hidden passage," he whispered, almost trembling with excitement. "We have to see what's inside." Eddie grabbed his arm. "Be careful. It's too tight. We don't know what's in there." Tommy moved in between them, holding his lantern high. The crevice looked small but passable. "We can squeeze through carefully, one at a time," he suggested. "But stay close, don't rush." Samuel went first, moving with surprising agility. The space was narrow, and his lantern light barely reached forward. Tommy and Eddie followed, slowly, their bodies brushing against the walls. The air inside the crevice was cooler, damper, and heavier than before. The dripping of water sounded louder here, echoing off walls that seemed impossibly close. As they moved deeper, the scraping sound returned, this time closer. It was soft but persistent, as if something, or someone, was moving just out of sight. The boys' hearts pounded in unison. Tommy tightened his grip on the lantern, shining the light ahead. The shadows flickered, creating shapes that made them jump. Suddenly, Samuel stopped. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Something moved. Eddie's voice shook slightly. "Maybe it's just a rock falling." But Tommy knew better. He had seen the shadow, fleeting and strange. It moved with purpose, vanishing before his lantern could fully reach it. He swallowed hard. "Let's stay calm," he said, forcing himself to sound confident. "It's just the cave. Maybe an animal or a loose rock." They continued cautiously, but the tight passage suddenly split into two small openings. Tommy looked at the options, his mind racing. Both passages were dark and narrow. He felt a pang of fear, but also knew they had to choose. "Let's take the left one," he decided. "It looks a little wider." Samuel went first again, his lantern casting shaky light on the walls. Eddie followed, his hands brushing against the stone to guide him. Tommy went last, watching the shadows and listening for the soft sounds that seemed to follow them. As they advanced, the passage widened slightly into a small chamber. The ceiling was low, and the walls were damp, covered with strange patterns of stone. In the middle of the chamber was a shallow pool of water, reflecting the lantern light in soft ripples. The scraping sound had stopped, replaced by a quiet dripping and the echo of their footsteps. For a moment, the boys felt a sense of relief. They had found a small space to rest, a momentary pause in the endless journey underground. Samuel knelt by the pool, touching the cool water. "It's like a hidden world," he murmured. "No one has seen this before." But the relief was short-lived. As Tommy stepped forward, he noticed something strange near the far wall. A small crevice, narrow and dark, seemed to open deeper into the cave. And then, without warning, Samuel, who had been closest to it, leaned in too far to look inside. Before anyone could react, he disappeared from sight. "Samuel!" Tommy shouted, rushing forward. Eddie followed immediately, their lanterns swinging wildly, casting shadows on the walls. They peered into the crevice, their eyes straining in, the dim light. But Samuel was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Tommy's voice shook. "Stay calm, he can't be far, he must be stuck somewhere close." Eddie grabbed Tommy's arm. "What if we can't reach him?" he whispered, fear clear in his eyes. Tommy shook his head. "We will reach him. We have to." They tried calling out, their voices echoing endlessly through the chamber, but there was no answer. The silence that followed was heavier than any darkness they had encountered so far. The boys' lanterns flickered in the still air, casting trembling light on the walls and the small pool. It reflected their worried faces, eyes wide, hearts racing, and the small shadows that seemed to move just beyond the light. Tommy's mind raced. He wanted to follow the crevice to reach Samuel immediately, but he knew the passage was tight. Eddie held on to him, both boys shaking with fear and uncertainty. They realized that they were not just lost now. They were separated. The cave that had felt like an adventure only hours ago had become a maze of endless darkness and unknown paths. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. They listened, calling out Samuel's name, their voices bouncing back at them in a strange chorus. The scraping sound had vanished, leaving only the faint drip of water and the whisper of air moving through unseen tunnels. The boys' hands gripped their lanterns tightly, their minds filled with both worry and determination. Tommy took a deep breath. "We have to find him," he said. "We can't leave him here alone." Eddie nodded, swallowing hard. "But we have to be careful too. If we get lost, we won't be able to help him." The boys stayed in the chamber a moment longer, considering their next move. They knew that the cave had more passages, more turns, and that they could easily be drawn further away from the entrance. And yet their courage pushed them forward. They would not abandon their friend. The adventure had turned into something far more serious than they had imagined. They were not just explorers now. They were searching for Samuel in a world of endless stone, shadows, and echoing silence. Every step they took would bring new surprises, new challenges, and the growing realization that Mammoth Cave, with all its beauty and wonder, was a place that could hide secrets far beyond what anyone could predict. The boys stared into the dark crevice where Samuel had disappeared, their lanterns trembling in their hands. Tommy's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to rush forward, to reach his friend immediately, but he knew the passage was too narrow. Eddie tugged at his sleeve, and for a moment the three of them, two remaining, stood frozen, listening to the faint echo of dripping water and their own uneven breaths. The cave, once a place of wonder, had become a vast, confusing maze. Every corner, every turn seemed identical, as though the walls themselves were shifting to hide the way out. Tommy forced himself to speak. "We can't panic. Samuel is close and we'll find him." His voice sounded firmer than he felt, trying to reassure both Eddie and himself. Eddie nodded slowly, though his eyes were wide with fear. "We have to stick together. One wrong step, and we could get lost too." They decided to explore the chamber carefully, examining every nook and cranny. The lanterns flickered against the damp walls, illuminating pools of water, jagged rocks, and shadowy cracks. Tommy tried to find any sign of Samuel, calling his name softly, letting the echo bounce through the cave. But there was no answer, only silence. Hours seemed to pass. The boys moved slowly, cautiously, following every possible passage, creeping through narrow spaces, climbing over small ledges, and peering into tiny crevices. The deeper they went, the colder the air became and the more exhausted they felt. Their lanterns were low, the flames flickering and weak. Every step required care. The floor was slippery in places, and the cave seemed determined to make their journey more difficult. Despite the fear, Tommy refused to give up. "Samuel wouldn't want us to stop," he reminded himself. Eddie gripped his arm, shivering, but kept moving. They called his name again, their voices soft but persistent, echoing back at them in the eerie quiet. Sometimes it sounded as though the cave answered, as if it were aware of their search. They found small clues that gave them hope. A piece of Samuel's scarf lay on a rock. A tiny footprint in the damp sand marked the path he had taken. Tommy picked up the scarf carefully, holding it close. "He was here," he said. "We're getting closer." Eddie swallowed hard and nodded, his fear tempered by hope. The tunnel began to slope upward slightly, and they followed it, thinking it might lead toward the cave's exit. But the paths split repeatedly, confusing them at every turn. They marked the walls with small scratches, using their lantern light to guide them, so they wouldn't lose the way they had already traveled. The deeper they went, the more they realized the cave was endless, and each passage looked exactly like the last. Finally, After what felt like hours, they stumbled into a wide chamber with a ceiling high above them. The space was still, the dripping, water the only sound. They stopped for a moment to catch their breath sitting on a flat stone ledge. Their lanterns lit the chamber softly, revealing small stalagmites and sparkling mineral deposits. For a brief moment, the boys felt a sense of wonder, remembering why they had come to the cave in the first place. But the thought of Samuel weighed heavily in their minds. Tommy decided to split his attention between searching the chamber and looking for possible exits. He noticed a faint tunnel leading upward, narrow but wide enough for them to squeeze through. "This might lead to another part of the cave," he said. "Maybe it's a way toward the entrance." Eddie hesitated. "What if it's just another dead end?" "We have to try," Tommy replied. "We can't stay here. We need to move, even if it's risky." Carefully, they made their way toward the narrow tunnel. The passage was uneven and rocky, forcing them to crawl in some places and step carefully over small pools of water in others. The air grew warmer slightly as they ascended, suggesting they were moving toward the surface. Their lanterns flickered, weakly, and the boys worried that they might run out of light before reaching a larger chamber. Suddenly, Tommy's foot caught on a loose stone, and he stumbled. Eddie grabbed his arm quickly, steadying him. "We have to be more careful," Eddie said quietly, his voice trembling. "One misstep and we could fall or get trapped." "I know," Tommy said, shaking off the fear. "We'll be fine. We just have to keep moving." As they continued, the passage widened slightly, giving them more space to walk. The walls sparkled faintly in the lantern light, reflecting tiny droplets of water. It was beautiful, but the boys barely noticed. Their thoughts were entirely on finding Samuel and making it out of the cave alive. After a long climb, they emerged into another chamber. The ceiling was high, and the walls glistened with moisture. It was quiet, except for the soft echo of their footsteps and the occasional drip of water. They looked around carefully, hoping to find some sign of Samuel, but the chamber was empty, save for the shadows cast by their lanterns. Eddie sank to, his knees exhausted. I can't keep going," he whispered. Tommy placed a hand on his shoulder. "We have to. We can't give up now. Samuel is counting on us." They pressed onward, moving carefully through the next series of passages. The cave seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that made them feel disoriented. Each step required focus, and every shadow seemed alive, playing tricks on their tired minds. Finally, they reached a point where the passage split again. Tommy paused, studying both options. He noticed faint marks on the wall, scratches that were different from their own. "These could be Samuel's," he said, pointing. "Maybe he went this way." Eddie nodded, and together they followed the marks. The tunnel became steeper, the air cooler and fresher, suggesting they were moving closer to the cave's surface. Their steps grew faster, filled with a mixture of hope and urgency. Then, in a small chamber ahead, they found something that made their hearts sink. A piece of Samuel's cap lay wedged between two rocks. It was torn slightly, and there were faint signs that he had tried to squeeze through a narrow crevice. Tommy picked it up carefully, holding it in his hand. "He was here," he said, his voice tight. "But he must have gone further ahead." Eddie's eyes filled with tears. "Do you think we'll see him again?" Tommy swallowed hard. "We have to believe we will. We can't lose hope now." They continued their search, moving through the twisting passages. The air grew warmer, the damp smell less strong, and they began to hear faint sounds that reminded them of the world. Above, distant wind, the echo of small animals. They pressed on, driven by hope and fear, careful with each step, calling Samuel's name softly but urgently. Eventually, they found a passage that sloped upward more steeply. Tommy led the way, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The passage opened into a larger chamber with several exits, each one dark and narrow. Tommy studied the walls and floor carefully, looking for any sign of Samuel. But the chamber was empty. He felt a knot of fear in his chest, knowing that the cave had claimed their friend somewhere along the way. Eddie sighed, his voice barely audible. "We can't find him, he's gone." Tommy's hands clenched around his lantern. He wanted to argue, to insist that they keep searching, but deep down, he knew Eddie was right. The cave was vast, mysterious, and unforgiving. Samuel had vanished into its depths, and there was no way to reach him now. With heavy hearts, the boys decided to find a way out. They moved carefully, marking their path and climbing over rocks and small ledges. Each step was a mixture of relief and sorrow, as they realized that the adventure they had begun with laughter and excitement had turned into a journey of loss and discovery. Finally, after hours of careful movement, they saw a faint light ahead. Their hearts lifted slightly and they moved toward it quickly. The light grew brighter, warmer, and finally they emerged from the cave into the fresh air of the outside world. The sunlight was blinding after the darkness, but it felt safe, comforting, and real. The boys stood at the cave entrance, breathing deeply, their lanterns flickering weakly in their hands. They looked at each other, and for the first time since entering, there were no words, only the shared understanding of what had happened. One of them had vanished into the darkness, lost to the mysterious depths of Mammoth Cave, and only two had returned. Tommy held the lantern tightly, looking back into the cave one last time. He felt a mix of relief, guilt, and sorrow. They had survived, but Samuel had not. The cave had taken him, leaving behind only memories and small traces of his presence. Eddie placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder, and together they turned away from the entrance, carrying the weight of the experience with them. Even as they walked back toward town, the story of their adventure and the loss of their friend would remain with them forever. Mammoth Cave had revealed its beauty and mystery, but it had also shown them its power, its danger, and its secrets that were best left undisturbed. After emerging from the cave, the sunlight felt both warm and blinding. Tommy and Eddie squinted, blinking against the brightness after so many hours in darkness. The air outside smelled of grass, flowers, and summer fields, so different from the damp, cold smell of the underground. They took a deep breath, hoping to feel relief, but neither could shake the heaviness in their hearts. Samuel was gone, lost somewhere in the labyrinth of tunnels, and the reality of it weighed on them like a stone in their chests. Tommy held the lantern close, its weak flame flickering even in the daylight. He glanced back at the cave entrance, shadows still lingering where darkness met light. He remembered the moments inside, the narrow passages, the echoing drops of water, the strange flickers of shadow, and the small clues that Samuel had left behind. His mind replayed the fear, the tension, and the final moment when his friend had disappeared. He felt a mixture of guilt and helplessness. "I should have been faster," he whispered quietly, as if saying it aloud might change nothing. Eddie placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder, his own face pale and serious. "We couldn't have known," he said gently. "It wasn't your fault. We did everything we could." Tommy nodded, though the words did little to ease the ache inside. He had led them into the cave, had promised an adventure, and now one of their friends was gone. He tried to remember the excitement they had felt hours ago, the wonder of discovering chambers, the sparkling stones, the underground pools, but those memories were shadowed by loss. The boys made their way back to town slowly, every step heavy with thought. Villagers noticed their return, calling out greetings and asking about their day. The boys answered quietly, their voices subdued. The town soon realized something had happened. They could see it in the boys' faces, the slow pace and the silent weight they carried. Parents and neighbors hurried to meet them, concern and fear written across their expressions. Tommy and Eddie explained what had happened as best they could. They spoke of the chambers, the tunnels, the sparkling stones, and the narrow crevices Samuel had explored. And then they told the hardest part. Samuel had vanished into the cave. They had searched, tried to call to him, and followed every path they could. But the boy had disappeared into the darkness and there was no sign of him. The town listened, a hushed silence falling over the small gathering. Some people whispered prayers for Samuel, while others exchanged worried glances. The local authorities and experienced cave explorers were called in to search, but Mammoth Cave was vast, and every passage seemed to twist endlessly. Days turned into nights, and searches found only small traces: Samuel's scarf, a footprint in damp sand, a cap wedged between rocks. Each finding brought hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Tommy and Eddie were asked to stay home to rest and recover from their ordeal, but sleep was nearly impossible. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw the cave's darkness, the bowie, flicker of lantern light, the shadows that seemed to move as they moved in the last moment they had seen Samuel. Their minds replayed it endlessly, a memory they could not escape. They spoke little, their conversations sparse, filled with quiet reflection and the occasional mention of hope. The experience changed them in ways that no one else could understand. The adventure that had begun with laughter and excitement now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by loss. Yet, even amid the sorrow, there was a strange appreciation for the cave itself, a recognition of its beauty, its mystery, and its immense power. They had walked through a world that few had ever seen, a hidden place beneath the earth that held both wonder and danger. Over the weeks and months, the story of the disappearance spread beyond their town. People from neighboring towns came to hear the tale, each retelling growing slightly more dramatic. Some spoke of strange sounds in the cave, faint voices that seemed to echo Samuel's name, or lights flickering far inside where no one should have been. Children whispered the story to one another, imagining the adventure, the fear, and the brave boys who had dared to explore the underground world. Tommy and Eddie became quiet figures in the town, often seen walking near the fields or sitting under the old oak tree where their adventure had begun. They did not talk much about the cave anymore, but the memories stayed with them, as vivid as ever. On certain nights they would dream of the passages, the glittering stones, the dripping water, and the small chamber where Samuel had vanished. They sometimes wondered if he had found another passage, if he had survived somewhere deep inside, or if the cave had claimed him entirely. The questions had no answers, only the lingering mystery. As they grew older, the experience shaped who they became. Tommy learned to balance courage with caution, remembering always the fine line between adventure and danger. Eddie grew quieter, thoughtful and careful, always aware of how quickly things could change when exploring the unknown. And both carried Samuel's memory with them, honoring him in their daily lives, speaking of him sometimes with other friends, and never forgetting the lessons learned in the dark tunnels of Mammoth Cave. The cave itself became a symbol in the town, both admired and feared. Locals would tell stories of the boys' adventure, warning others to respect its vastness, to never underestimate its complexity, and to always take care. Some said they could hear Samuel's faint laughter in certain chambers, or see the flicker of a small lantern deep within. Others claimed the cave had moods, sometimes calm and welcoming, other times whispering with the sounds of unseen passages. It became part of the town's identity, a reminder that the world held wonders beyond imagination, but also mysteries that were best approached with caution. Years later, Tommy and Eddie would visit the cave again, not to explore, but to remember. They would stand at the edge of the entrance, lanterns in hand, and talk quietly about the adventure, the beauty, and the loss. The memory of Samuel was always with them, a reminder of friendship, courage, and the unpredictability of life. Even as adults, they would sometimes dream of the underground chambers, the sparkling stones, and the sound of dripping water echoing in the silence. The Mammoth Cave. Mystery became a story that passed from one generation to the next, told to children with a mixture of awe and caution. It was a story of friendship, bravery, and loss, but also of wonder. It reminded everyone that some places held secrets deeper than the eye could see, and that curiosity, while powerful and inspiring, must always be paired with respect and care. Tommy and Eddie never forgot Samuel. They often spoke of him in quiet moments, imagining the places he might have explored, the paths he might have taken, and the stories he would have told. The cave had taken him, but it had also given them something precious: the understanding of courage, the depth of friendship, and the reality that life sometimes carries mysteries that may never be solved. Even decades later, the story of those three boys remained in the hearts of the town. Visitors to Mammoth Cave would hear the tale, marvel at the beauty of the underground world, and feel a shiver at the thought of the boy who had vanished. The cave remained, as it always had, a place of wonder, darkness, and secrets. It reminded everyone who dared to enter that beneath the earth lay a world both magical and mysterious, a place where adventure and danger existed side by side, and where memories and legends could last a lifetime. And so, the story ended not with answers, but with reflection. The boys returned, the town remembered, and the cave held its secrets. Yet in the hearts of those who had walked its passages, the memory of Samuel and the journey they had shared remained bright, a light in the darkness, a whisper of mystery, and a testament to the courage of those who dare to explore the unknown.